Ladies and gentlemen, what do you think, how many books existed, let's say, 2,000-3,000 years ago in the past? You think maybe 20 books, or 100 books, or maybe 1,000 books? There were millions of books in the past. Millions. Where are they? They were all destroyed. And mostly not by natural catastrophes. Of course, some were destroyed by natural catastrophe, but mostly by the humans. When, for example, Francisco Pizarro, he was the Spanish conqueror, arrived to South America, he found not books, but he found quipus, traditions, handed traditions. He forbid that the people continued to tell these traditions, these religions. When Cortes arrived to Central America, they give order, it was a bishop, Diego de Landa, he gave order to destroy all the books of the Maya. There were 10,000 of Maya books. Everything was destroyed. The library of Alexandria, with roughly 600,000 books in Antiquity, completely destroyed, etc. The library of Pergamon in ancient Greeks. Millions of books existed. They do not exist anymore. Only a few have survived this catastrophe, and mostly because they were religious books. One of these books who survived is called the Book of Enoch. Who is Enoch? In the Old Testament, we hear that Enoch was a prophet. He was the seventh patriarch before the Great Flood. So obviously a Stone Age man before the Great Flood. And by the way, according to the Bible, Enoch is the first human who disappeared from our planet with his body. It is said in a fiery chariot. And one day, according to tradition again, he's supposed to return. Now Enoch was a patriarch, the seventh patriarch. And Enoch is mentioned in the Bible very briefly, with just 2 phrases. But then roughly 160 years ago, a British explorer came to Ethiopia, and he stood there in Abyssinia in Ethiopia for more than 30 years. He learned the language, he was in a convent, and in the library of the convent he found a book entitled The Book of Enoch. He said, hey, I know the word Enoch, the name Enoch from the Bible. Now there's a Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch was translated first into English, later into German, and here we have a German version. It's a part of the apocryphic texts of the Old Testament. You do not find the Book of Enoch in the Bible. You have to find the apocryphic texts, and among the apocryphic texts you find the Book of Enoch. Now, what is so interesting about the Book of Enoch? He writes in the first person, in the I version. I saw, I did, I heard. He's not the storyteller in the third person. They told me. Now he speaks in the first person. And he says, he was young, he was a boy, they hear the noise in the sky, then some beings descended from the sky, everything was running away, but he was 12 years at that time, and he stood there, astonished. And then he saw 2 beings coming close to him, and he clearly say, they had not the breast of a human. They were not human. They were breathing, but not like us. And he says, they were not terrestrials. I never saw beings like these on our planet. Now one of the 2 speaks the language of Enoch. How is this possible? Imagine a group of extraterrestrials is surviving, observing our planet in a mother spaceship in the orbit. Then smaller vehicles come down, like ethnologists would do today. They observe only a few group of people. Ethnologists would observe a certain culture, a certain camp, for example, and the ethnologists learn the language of the natives. Still today, on our planet, we have more than I don't know, 4,000 languages or even more. But every language is translatable into another language. Our ethnologists, within a few months, we learn the languages of the natives. The same took place in the past. Extraterrestrials observed their groups, like today. and they learn the language. So I'm not astonished when one of the extraterrestrials speaks the language of Enoch. And the stranger says to the young boy, the Enoch, don't be afraid, human. Don't be afraid. We won't harm you. So Enoch stays there, and the stranger says, if you wish, we will take you up to the sky and we will teach you. So Enoch says, yes, I wish I come with you. One of the strangers says to the young man, humans, you stink terribly. Obviously, in the nose of the extraterrestrials, he was smelling bad. So Enoch has to wash himself. He has to spring into the next water. He has to wash his body, his hairs, everything. Once he's out of the water again, one of the strangers gives Enoch a clothes. First, he gives him a sort of cream and says he should put this cream all over his body, including his face and his hairs. Enoch does so, and he smells on his skin, and he says, hey, I smelled like ambrosia and some other ingredients which we cannot translate today. And then one of the strangers gives Enoch a clothes, and Enoch cannot wear on this clothes. He doesn't know how to start. He doesn't understand the clothes. So one of the strangers explained him how to get into this clothes. And Enoch do so, and then he looks down at himself and he said, I looked like one of them. Obviously, he's in the same suit now, in the same overall, which the extraterrestrials have. In his stinky human clothes, he could never have gone up to the space. Now they take him. Enoch describes, they took me up to the sky. He saw the round earth beneath him, the round earth, which you can see only from the earth, from an orbit. And don't forget, we speak about the time in Stone Age. Nobody was there. So he sees the round earth. Then he sees up there some gigantic things. In his time, he has no word like spaceships. He doesn't know what this is. He says they looked like stars. They were shining, glittering, doors opened, or the doors closed again. They brought me into a strange garden with strange flowers and strange vegetables, which I never saw on earth. Then they come into a big room. It was the central hall, and in the center of it was a throne. Well, a throne is a chair, and on the throne was sitting the great majesty. Now, when Enoch arrives with these two extraterrestrials who guide him, altogether three, the majesty stands up from his throne, from his seat, walks 2 or 3 steps toward Enoch, shakes his hand and welcomes him. And then they'll teach Enoch their language. After some months, Enoch speaks the language of the extraterrestrials. And once he knows the language, they teach him in writing. They even say, they gave me a quick writing device. Whatever that is, a quick writing device. We have no idea. And then an extraterrestrial with the name of Werwol dictated him books. Of course, Enoch, after he speaks the language, he knows the name of his teachers. He's the only of these old writers who gives the name of the extraterrestrials. And there are the names of their leaders. The name of their first is Jekun. He is the one who seduced the children of man, etc., etc. Altogether, he gives 38 names of his teachers. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know today the name of the extraterrestrials. Why do I know this? Simply because it's written in the book of Enoch. And later, he explains what they teach him. For example, one of the teachers says to Enoch, human, look out there. Do you see this little light out there? You humans, you call it moon. But the moon has no light by itself. The moon receives its light from the sun. And he explains to young Enoch how the moon sometimes is full, is half full, is empty, etc. So the moon phases. The stranger, the astronomer, explains Enoch that our Earth is a planet surrounding the sun in 365 days plus some leak hours. So very, very precise. So Enoch knows our planetary system. The strangers teach him in astronomy, in every possibility. They teach him in engineering, in all kind of technology. And then they send him down to Earth. Now, Enoch learns that obviously on board of the spaceship there was a sort of mutiny going on, because it was not allowed to have sex with humans. But some of these extraterrestrials wanted to have sex with humans, which is understandable today. I mean, compare it with a company in a ship, humans in a ship which are for 3 or 4 months, 400 years ago, in a ship between Europe and America, and now they finally came to an island and they say beautiful girls, they want to have sex. But the same thing, some of these extraterrestrials wanted to have sex. It is clearly saying in the book of Enoch, I quote, "But when the sons of the heavens saw that the daughters of men were fair, they admired them and desired to mate with them. And they said to each other, we will take them as wives." By the way, sex with extraterrestrials, is this not rubbish, nonsense? Why should extraterrestrials be like us? Why should they have the same sexual apparatus as we have? I mean, a penis or a vagina. Is this not just simply a wish, imagination? Just go to the Bible, look at the first book of Moses. When the humans began to multiply and have daughters, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took them as their wives. I have been often accused by critics and skeptics that I was the one who came up with the silly idea that extraterrestrials had sex with humans. I'm sorry, dear critics, that's not my idea. It comes out of the Bible, just control it. Out of the book of Enoch and out of many old traditions, at least 5,000 to 6,000 years old. It is not my idea. But why should extraterrestrials be able to have sex with us? Because we are the offsprings of them. I explained this in my earlier speech. You know, the gods created humans according their own image. We are their offsprings. Therefore, there is no difference between the sexual apparatus of the extraterrestrials and us. Now, Enoch really describes everything what they teach him. Finally, the same Enoch gives order to construct the Great Pyramid. Why? He had written himself over 100 books. How do we know this? We have the one book of Enoch, which was found in Ethiopia in this convent by this British explorer. And in his own book, Enoch gave his books to his son Methuselah with the order, "And now, my son Methuselah, I give you these books, written by your father's hands. Keep them carefully for the generations after the great flood." And he says in the books, it was more than 100 volumes. Where are Enoch's books, except the one we found in Ethiopia? All in the Great Pyramid, because Enoch was the architect, the planner, the engineer of the Great Pyramid. He says it himself, and all Egyptian texts say the same thing. He made the planning, and inside the Great Pyramid we will find the books of Enoch. Now, how did these extraterrestrials look like? I said human-like because we are their offsprings. And our Stone Age people, of course, tried to give images of these extraterrestrials. They look like the following. Here, this is Tulum. Tulum is on the Caribbean Sea. It is an old Maya city. And Tulum is devoted to the descending gods. On every temple in Tulum, you see the gods descending. You see something here, a head, then 2 spread legs, but you can see the wings in front of it. Like, imagine it's a human like on a bobsled. His hands are in the front of him, but he's descending from heaven. You see the wings on his side. The city of Tulum in Central America is full of the descending gods. But not only there. We find these interpretations all over. There is in a place called La Venta, is near the city of Villahermosa in Mexico. There is this stone block. It's a gigantic stone, and you see inside a dragon. You see a dragon, you see the face of the dragon with the open mouth, and inside the dragon a human is sitting. When you look closer, he has a helmet on. He has even something to breathe before his nose, and he uses his hands to manipulate controls. He's sitting in the dragon monolith. And as we know from old China, the gods were descending in fiery dragons, in fiery dragon chariots, all of them. But this continues. Here you clearly, this is also in La Venta, in Mexico, near the city of Villahermosa. You see on top of it, you see a being coming down. Closely, you see his helmet. You see his face behind the helmet. He has even a microphone before his lips, and his hands are bending forward towards the planet Earth. He's descending to us. This goes over. Our forefathers have represented the so-called gods in so many ways. The museums of the world are full with them. And when we ask the local archaeologists, what is this? What is this meaning? They say, well, it's the gods, the winged gods. But who were these gods? Now, dear listener, you clearly have to understand, I am speaking about Stone Age. These Stone Age people had no helmets by themselves. They did not knew what a helmet is. So they represented their gods in helmets. Behind their helmets. The face is definitely behind the helmet. And they also made this in cave paintings. This is very impressive. These cave paintings came from the Sahara Desert. There are some mountains called the Tassili Mountains. And this figure, which you see, is in the original 6 meter high. The archaeologist who discovered it over 40 years ago, a French named Archaeology, called this spontaneously the great Martian god. So our ancestors did represent the extraterrestrials, and this worldwide. You know, just before we were in the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert is Africa, but now we are in Australia, in the Kimberley Ranges. You see, the gods always had their rays around their heads, their helmets. And the Natis really called it the gods, the teachers. They have come down to the humans to teach us, to learn from all this. Now, old books existed, I said, millions. Most of them were destroyed. A few of them have survived, mostly because of religion. And the book of Enoch is hardly to control for everyone. I mean, not everyone has apocryphic texts and can check what I say. By the way, what I roughly just took out of the book of Enoch is of course translated in a religious manner. You know, some 150 years ago, 200 years ago, when our scholars, very well educated professors and brilliant people translated Enoch, at that time they had no idea of spaceships, of space travel. They believed it must have to do something with the Almighty God. So the story, which I just told you in my eyes, seen in the religious way in the book of Enoch, is explained in the following way. 2 angel descents. I said 2 extraterrestrials. In the religious text translation, 2 angels. These 2 angels say to Enoch, young man, we have to baptize you. So he has to put himself into the water. In reality, he has to clean himself because he was simply stinking. He comes out and he receives a cream which he has to put all over his body. Now, in the religious term, says he is anointed with that cream. Anointed with that cream. In reality, it was simply a disinfection of his skin. Then he received the clothes, something which the extraterrestrials took. In the religious version, they say now he received the clothes of a high priest. Imagine, a 12-year-old boy received the clothes of a high priest. It's all garbage. Then they go up with the space shuttle to the mother spaceship. In the religious version, they say, now Enoch is taken into the heavens. Now up there, he comes to a different garden where he sees strange vegetable, strange fruits, strange flowers. In the religious version, they explain you, now Enoch is in the paradise. He sees the flowers and the vegetable in paradise. And then it's all ridiculous. He's just in the mother spaceship. Then he comes into the big room, the main room, the commanding place with the chair in the center. Now in religious version they said Enoch is standing before the Almighty God. But this is absolutely nonsense. Simply imagine the real Almighty God who would never have stood up, walked a few steps towards Enoch, shaked his hand and welcomed him. We have all misinterpreted it, not because we were stupid, simply because we had no alternative. The time was not ripe at that time. We had to translate it in a religious way. In the meantime, the zeitgeist has changed, and we have the possibility to see these things with modern eyes. Now, as you hardly can control Enoch because it belongs to the apocryphic text, I suggest just go to the Bible and take your Bible, and in every Old Testament you find the story of the prophet Ezekiel. You can control it, what I say now. Like Enoch, Ezekiel speaks in the first person. I saw, I heard, they told me, etc., etc. And simply you have to know who was Ezekiel. Ezekiel was by profession a high priest at the Temple of Jerusalem. And during his time, roughly around 700 BC, Jerusalem was captured by the Babylonians. And the high society of the Jewish were taken away as slaves into Babylonia. And Ezekiel, as a high priest, he belonged to the high society. He was captured too. He went to Babylonia. And why he is in Babylonia and works as a slave, he has what is coming now in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel starts by saying he was there working with others, and then they hear the noise in the sky. And of a sudden they saw a light in the sky, and they saw something descending from the sky. At the same time they heard a tremendous noise. Of course they all believe it must be God. It must be the Almighty God who comes down to us. This object comes to a standstill before the slaves. They all are afraid. They all fell down to their ground. Ezekiel, as a high priest, he believes that God is here. So he thinks it is my duty to stand up as the first one to welcome the Almighty God. So he does so. He stands up. And then he realizes that what stands before him is not God. And so he describes in every detail what he sees. Before him is a vehicle, and Ezekiel describes the vehicle. He calls the whole vehicle the splendorness of the highest. By the way, in German Bibles and in English Bibles, you always read the splendorness of God. I read Ezekiel in Greek and in Latin, and in original the word God never appears in the book of Ezekiel. He calls it the splendorness of the highest. The word God is simply an error of the interpretations of the translation. In the original, the word God does not appear. So Ezekiel says there was the splendorness of the highest. On top of it, he saw something glittering up. And in this glittering thing was something like a throne. And on the throne was somebody sitting on the throne who looked like a human. And beneath this throne, he saw four living creatures. And the four living creatures had wings. And when the wings moved, a terrible noise appeared. Ezekiel describes the noise with the tremendous, with the loud noise of vehicles, of tanks, of battles, etc., and of a storm. And he sees under the wings, he sees wheels, 4 wheels, and he realizes that these 4 wheels looked as if one wheel were in the middle of another wheel. And Ezekiel describes the wheels can move in every direction, forward, right and left, without making any steering movement. Just imagine you are sitting in your car and you have your steering wheel, and now you turn your steering wheel, the front wheel are moving in the direction because you want to go in a curve. Now Ezekiel sees wheels which go forward, backward, left and right without making a steering movement. This confuses him completely. He describes the strange wheel 4 times. And then he says that these wheels had some red dots outside, etc. And when the wings and the wheels, when the wings disappeared, went up from the earth, move up, the wheels moved up too, etc., etc. He described every detail. Just read the Bible and control it. Now, what's all about this? He, by the way, also describes the legs. He compares it with metal, glittering metal, and so on. Now, what's all about this? What has it to do with ancient aliens? A lot. Ezekiel is one of the main proofs out of holy books. Some, I don't know, don't record anymore, some 25 years, little more, I had a secret speech at NASA's office, in the United States in Huntsville. Why secret? Somebody from NASA's office came together to me and asked me if I could have a speech at their place, but I should not go to public. They didn't want it to know it publicly that I was speaking at NASA. So I agreed. Everyone was there. I spoke at NASA for about 1 hour, and after we had a dinner together, and at that time the chief of the construction department, Mr. Joseph Blumrich, came to me and he said, "Erich, that was very impressive, but you also speak about Ezekiel." He said, "In the Bible," he said, "you will never find technology. The Bible, these are dreams. The Bible, these are just illustrations, imaginations, wishes, but nothing reality. Definitely no technology." And Mr. Joe Blumrich, as I said, the chief of construction at that time at NASA, he said he never read Ezekiel in original. But now, after my speech, he decided to do so. And he did. And word by word, he became astonished. And he said, "Hey, what this Ezekiel writes here, we can reconstruct, we can recalculate." And Joseph Blumrich did it. Word by word, he reconstructed what Ezekiel was writing and what was he describing and seeing. And finally, this was the result of it. Of course, this is not a modern spaceship. With this vehicle, you never can move from star to star. This is what we would call today a space shuttle. In Antiquity, in old India, they called it a Vimana. And the world was full of Vimanas coming from sky. So a space shuttle comes from a modern spaceship. Ezekiel describes the whole thing as the splendorness of the highest. He says up there was something glittering, and inside was something like a throne, and on this throne somebody sitting like a human. It's simply the command place with the chair in there, and the commander is sitting on there. Ezekiel has no words for it. Then he describes 4 living creatures. Where are here living creatures? Do you see living creatures? Do not forget, Ezekiel writes in Stone Age time. He has no idea of technology. If something moves by himself, by itself, for him it is alive. He believes that the wings who moved are alive. So he describes them as living creatures, and he clearly says the wings were the ones who made the terrible noise, which he compared to a thunderstorm, etc. He even says, when the wings stood still, they hang down to the ground. Soon as the wings start to move, that the noise started to begin. And when the wings left up from the earth, the wheels lifted up from the earth too. Now, then we have under the wings, we have these wheels. And Ezekiel described the wheels in every detail. At NASA, Joe Blumrich, they reconstructed Ezekiel's wheel. They separated the wheel from the central wheel's axis into different sections. Now every section you can see has its own axis. It is easy to understand this. With this kind of wheel, you can drive forward or backward. But you also can drive left or right without making a moving steerman. Why not? You see, simply the axis below it would move towards you. So you don't need a moving a steering movement. With this wheel, you can move into any desired direction, which is very important for space travel. When they land on a strange planet, they don't know, is the planet flat? Is the place flat, or is it surrounded by rocks? We have no space to make a big curve. We have to move in angles. That's why they need this kind of wheel. By the way, NASA got a patent, an international patent on this wheel. For me, it's funny. We have a patent for space travel, but in reality, the whole idea comes out of a holy book of Ezekiel. Now, when you read Ezekiel, you will realize he describes this vehicle, this space vehicle, from chapter 1 roughly to chapter 39. These are all the details which are reconstructed by NASA. And after chapter 39, he says that the splendorness of the highest returned a second time. It come again. And this time, the hands of the highest took him up and put him on the seat upon there. So in my explanation, he's sitting on the co-pilot's chair. Now they start, and Ezekiel feels the weight of his body. He doesn't know where they go. He describes, they brought me on a very, very high mountain. He doesn't know where the mountain is. Then slowly he sees beneath him something like a little city or a big village. And in the center, something like a temple, so a big building. Here I roughly have to ask, what is a temple? I mean, today we say a temple is something where we admire God, or our ancestors admired God. But in antiquity, the temple was simply a place of the residence of the gods, of the extraterrestrials. So he sees something, and the splendorness of the highest in which himself is sitting comes to a still point over this thing. And slowly they descend inside the building, which means the building had no roof. Now it comes to a standstill, and of a sudden a strange being in white clothes appears to Ezekiel. And the strange says first to Ezekiel in his language, "Oh humans, you humans have eyes to see, but you see nothing. And you have eyes to hear, but you hear nothing." The stranger obviously shows a measuring instrument. We doesn't know what kind of measuring instrument, it doesn't matter what it is, something which you can measure, and gives Ezekiel order to measure the whole temple. And Ezekiel knows in the meantime that this is not God. He has courage. He asked back, "Why should I measure this building?" And the stranger said, "That's why we brought you here." So Ezekiel starts to measure length and large and every corner and everything. You read these measurements in the Bible. Now in Germany, there was an engineer. His name was Hans Herbert Bayer. And he came across these measurements of this temple of Ezekiel. And he asked himself, like the NASA man Blumrich did before, are these measurements real? Is this just imagination, a dream? And he started to recalculate exactly according to the measurements in the Bible, the so-called temple. And this is the outcome of it. The so-called temple has the form of today we will say a stadium, open to the sky, and it is big enough that this extraterrestrial space shuttle, the Vimana, can move directly into it. You know, it was sorting a landing place for the extraterrestrials on this planet. Now the funny thing is, when Hans Herbert Bayer, the German engineer, reconstructed all this, he did not know something about the NASA reconstruction of Mr. Joe Blumrich. I brought the two people together, the NASA man and the German engineer. And the German engineer's reconstruction fit perfectly into the NASA reconstruction of the space shuttle. So here we have a gigantic proof of Ezekiel. By the way, in religion, the theologians, they see this completely different. This is clear. They say Ezekiel had a vision. He had a vision of the far future. The Lord took him up to a high mountain and showed him a temple in Jerusalem in the far future. But this is all nonsense. Ezekiel wrote clearly, they brought me to a very, very high mountain. Where in Jerusalem is a very, very high mountain? Nowhere. And then the scholars, they believe that Ezekiel had the vision of a future temple in a future Jerusalem. That's why they translated the whole Ezekiel text in the future. You know, when you read Ezekiel now, you will read, for example, and the temple will be so and so long, he will be so and so long, large, he will be, etc. He will be means future. But in reality, and I know Ezekiel's original text, in reality there is no future in Ezekiel's text. He clearly said the temple is as large as that, as long as that, etc. It's reality. So, in reality, Ezekiel was measuring something which we call today a base camp of the extraterrestrials. But why for all this should Ezekiel measure this building? Why should a group of extraterrestrials fly to Babylon to take some of the leading slaves, Ezekiel, bring him to their base camp, order him to measure a building, their base camp building, and bring him back to his people? Why? What's for? I mean, Ezekiel asked the stranger, why should they do this? And the stranger said, that's why we brought you here. Simply because of us. The extraterrestrials knew exactly that Ezekiel and his society believe that all this has to do with God, with the real Almighty God. Now Ezekiel's text would go into the holy books, and whenever the humans during the future thousands of years, they will have battles and wars, the holy texts would survive. The extraterrestrials knew that far in the future, someone would read these holy texts and would realize this is not God. This is technology. And that's exactly what we have today, because the spirit of time has changed. And today, without today's meaning, we can ask, what happened? And we understand they brought him to the high mountain, they brought him back, he should write about this. They knew it would enter into the holy text. They knew in the far future the holy text would be translated in a modern way. And today we have this modern way. Today we can ask, where did these extraterrestrials come from? What did they wanted? Will they return? And of course they will return. Now, all this happened more than 2,700 years ago. How took it really place? I made a computer animation. Look at this. Ezekiel is one of the slaves captured by the Babylonians. They hear the noise up in the sky. They see something coming close to their place. They are all afraid. They all fell to the ground, including Ezekiel. But Ezekiel, as the leader of the group, don't forget, professionally, he's the high priest in the Temple of Jerusalem. He believed that this is God. So as first one, he stood up to admire God, to give honor to God. And then he realized this is not God. And so he has the courage to write what his eyes see. He clearly describes the legs who came down, who sparkled like glittering metal. He describes the wings who made this tremendous noise. He says between the wings something was glittering. It was the cooler of the reactor, because the energy for this machine comes from an atomic reactor. Small atomic reactors exist even today. He describes the wheel. One wheel in the middle of another wheel. And he says the wheel could go in every direction without any steering movement. That's exactly what these wheels do. They don't make a steering movement. Finally, Ezekiel himself is taken away. They put him up, probably with an artificial arm, and put him on the chair of the co-pilot. Enoch does not know where they go. That's why he writes, they brought me on a very, very high mountain. He doesn't know where. It is not Jerusalem in the future, because in Jerusalem there is no very, very high mountain. He's sitting in there. They fly over the big village or a small city, and he sees different buildings, and in the center something like a temple which had no roof. Obviously, the station, the base camp of the extraterrestrials. The splendorness of God, in which Ezekiel himself is sitting, slowly enters into the so-called temple. At that time, Ezekiel realized that the noise of the wings was double as high as before out in the desert, because now he hears the echo of the noise. Finally, the splendorness of God, of the so-called God, comes to a standstill. Ezekiel gets out, and there comes this man in glittering clothes, and first says to Ezekiel, "Oh, humans, you humans have eyes to see, but you see nothing. You have ears to hear, but you hear nothing." And then he gives him the order to measure the temple, the so-called temple, in reality the base camp of the extraterrestrials. Ezekiel makes this measurement. And today, because of Ezekiel's description, we have our modern explanation. We know that it was all technology. It had nothing to do with God. And at this moment, it is clear to express, I am a deep believer in God. I never left my believing in God. I am one of these figures who still pray every evening. How is this possible? When I interpret Ezekiel and others in my way, how can I believe in God? Just imagine, ladies and gentlemen, for a few minutes, that I would be right with my way of looking all these things. So, okay, we have been visited by extraterrestrials. So what? Where did these extraterrestrials come from? Some faraway planet. Okay, how have they become intelligent? What is their evolution? Who made them? They were visited again from another solar system. And where did the others come from? Again from another solar system. And the others again? Play back the game, it doesn't matter. For millions of years, it doesn't matter. Finally you came to a standpoint, a starting point, where in all respect, with every religion, you have to admire, here is the beginning. Here is God. You never lose God. You see, in science, they tell us in the beginning there was a Big Bang. Okay, but what created the Big Bang, the so-called big atom? Nothing comes from nothing, not even in astrophysics. In religion, they say in the beginning there was God. But even God does not come from nothing. What or who creates God? So be it science or be it religion, we doesn't know the starting point. And that's the moment where in every respect we have to aspect there is a spirit, there is a being, a creation spirit which we adore and which we call in the human form as God. That's why I never lost God. I am one of these humble humans who pray and admire the spirit of the universe and God. Thank you for listening to this controversial Erich von Däniken. Hello everybody, my name is Erich von Däniken. Still, I am the author of Chariots of the Gods. My English is still not the best, but I hope you understand me. Thank you for being part of my workshop. And of course, we go right to the questions and answers.
Okay, first question. Some scholars say that Enoch only had a dream. What do you say to this?
That's true. In some of the books of Enoch, the professors who translated Enoch said that all this was a dream. Of course, it is not a dream. Simply do not forget the translations of the book of Enoch were made roughly 160 years ago. At that time, these professors and wonderful, high intelligent personalities who made these translations knew nothing about space travel, nothing about aircraft, nothing about modern technology. They could not understand what Enoch was telling us, that he was away, brought up to the skies. So they said, it must have been a dream. It was not a dream. It was absolutely reality. And this is easy to prove because the ETs up there, Enoch was brought into the space, into a spaceship, and the ETs teach him in different belongings. They clearly say and give him scientific instructions which he himself, as a Stone Age being, could not have known. So forget about the dream. In one case, the astronomer says to Enoch, human, look out there. Do you see this little light? You humans call it moon, but the moon has no light by itself. The moon receives its light from the sun. And then he explains why the moon is full and half, and so on. These are scientific information, has nothing to do with the dream. A Stone Age man could not dream these kind of things. So forget the dream. Enoch was reality.
Thank you very much. Here's the next question. You showed impressive cave paintings in the Sahara Desert. Where exactly are they and how old are they?
Cave paintings, this is a motif worldwide, not only the Sahara. Cave paintings, this is really 10,000 of it exist. And some of the most impressive ones are in the Sahara Desert. Now, Sahara is separated in different states. The place I call is in the state of Algeria and exactly near the Tassili Mountains. This is a mountain range in the Algerian part of the Sahara. And there are big, gigantic geoglyphics and paintings. The ones which I showed in my speech were in original 6 meter high. They show you really a human-like being in a spacesuit, fantastically. And as I said, 6 meter high in the original. That means the cave painter must have a sort of construct to paint all this 6 meter high. The French archaeologist, Mr. Henri Laude, who discovered this cave painting first, called it spontaneously the great Martian god. And that's exactly what it looks. But the great Martian god has similarities worldwide. They all are clear indication that this planet was visited by ETs some thousands of years ago, and not only in one place, not only in Africa or today's Algeria, worldwide. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Here's the next. You always talk about teaching, so to say, good gods. Are there records of bad ones as well?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, it's like we humans. Among us, we have good ones and bad ones. We have believers and honest people, and we have misbelievers and dishonest people. And don't forget, we are the offsprings of them. The so-called gods created humans according their own image. So among them, there were good ones and bad ones. Generally, the so-called gods of mythology and the so-called gods were extraterrestrials. They were teachers. They taught us. They learned us language and different belongings. They behaved themselves like today's ethnologists would do. They took a few of the intelligent young people with them, learned them their language, then dictated them books in their language, books about astronomy, about technology, about engineering, and so on. Then these people, these young people, came back to Earth and they worked here. Later, they were called prophets. In reality, they were simply the elves, the students of the extraterrestrials. So among these extraterrestrials, mostly they are good ones. They supported. We also have bad ones. I mean, we all remember a case in the Bible, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's written in the Bible that one morning the city was destroyed completely with fire from the sky. And that was not a volcanic eruption. That was not just an earthquake or something. It was done not by coincidence. It was done exactly after an order of the highest. So was this one a good one or a bad one? Anyhow, generally, they were good ones. They helped us.
Thank you. Another question about Enoch. Enoch says that the guardians of the skies dictated him over 100 books. Where are they today?
That's a good point. In reality, today we only have one book of Enoch. And this one book of Enoch was found roughly 170 years ago by a British explorer who came to Ethiopia. And there he learned the language, the Coptic language, and he was in a convent for more than 30 years. And in the library of the convent, he found the book of Enoch. He knew the name Enoch from the Bible, but he didn't know that Enoch was the author of a book. Now, how do we know that he was writing 100 books? We only have the one book of Enoch, which was found in that Ethiopian library. He himself, Enoch, says it. He says that they dictated him more than 100 books. And before Enoch leaves our planet, by the way, with the extraterrestrials, and another, by the way, he never calls them God. He calls them the guardians of the sky. And before he leaves, he gives this 100 books to his son, Methuselah, the one from the Bible, with the word, and now, my son Methuselah, I give you these books written by your father's hand. Keep them carefully for the coming generations after the great flood. Where are these books? Still today, there are in the Great Pyramid. And this is not just an invention of Erich von Däniken. I know the literature of some Arabian writers, thousands of years dead, and they clearly say that the constructor of the Great Pyramid was not Cheops. The constructor of the Great Pyramid was a pharaoh with the name of Saurid, and they specify Saurid is the same figure which the Hebrew community calls Enoch. And by the way, the Greek community calls Hermes. So, and he was the one who gave order to construct the Great Pyramid. Why? Because he wanted to put all his 100 books in the Great Pyramid so that they would not be destroyed by the Great Flood. So today we have one book of Enoch, the one which was found in Ethiopia in an old library. But more than 100 books of Enoch still wait for us in the Great Pyramid.
Thank you. Here's another question. You always say you are a deep believer in God. So are you still Catholic, or in which God do you believe?
I was educated in Switzerland, and I was a real good Catholic because I was educated for 6 years in a Catholic boarding school led by Jesuits. and I still am a deep believer in God. I never lost my belief in God. I am one of these figures who pray every day. But my God has to have some qualities. For example, my God does not need a vehicle in which to move from one point to the other. God is all over. Or my God does not descend with smoke and fire and trembling and loud noise and all these things. And my God should be a spiritual being. So therefore, he should be timeless. I mean, a God who makes an experiment and has to wait what the result is cannot be timeless. So I was educated in this Catholic boarding school, and I translated parts of the Bible from Greek to Latin and from Latin to German. And there I learned that the God of the Bible does need a vehicle in which to move from one point to the other. He does not know the future. He puts two beings, Adam and Eve, in the paradise, and he knows exactly that they will do something which were forbidden, and then he's obsessed. Why? He knew it in advance, and so on. I simply had doubts in my own Catholic education, and that was the reason why I started to read other old texts of many, many cultures. I simply wanted to find out if other cultures, some thousands of years ago, have similar stories than we have them in the Bible. In the meantime, I lost my belief in Christianity. I am still officially a Catholic. I still pay my Catholic churches, but I never practice Christianity or Catholic rituals. But I am a deep believer in God because I know in the beginning of the universe, it doesn't matter if it's religion or science, there is a spirit, and they are respectful with every religion. We call this spirit God.
Thank you. There's a connected question. In the Bible, Ezekiel speaks about the splendorness of God, but you say it was not God, but extraterrestrial. Who is right, the scholars or you?
Well, I'm assuming in that case, I am right. Just as I just said before, the real God must be a spiritual being. He does not need any vehicle in which to move around. Now, Ezekiel clearly speaks about the vehicle. He describes the wheels. He describes the noise which the vehicle means. He compares the noise with the thundering of a waterfall, etc. He describes the wings. Again, he describes the noise which the wings make, etc., etc. All these are very, very detailed descriptions. And Ezekiel does it in the first person, in the I version. I saw, I did, they brought me to, etc. And Ezekiel was not a liar. These people, some thousands of years ago, when they used the name of God, they were writing the truths. Now, Ezekiel in the original never used the word God. I just explained before, I was educated for 6 years in a Catholic boarding school, and we also made translations of the Ezekiel. In the original, the word God never appears. Only the translators called it the splendorness of God. In the reality, in original Ezekiel text, they say the splendorness of the highest. So it's all a question of translation. And the translation in that point is definitely wrong. Ezekiel was not speaking about God.
Thank you. Last question. I heard you just wrote a book in German about impossible evolution. When will this come on market in English language?
Oh, yes, I always are in fight with evolution. Of course, I know we are the product of evolution, but not only. Definitely, we came from the family tree of, if I say it in a non-scientific way, the family tree of the apes. But we are the only intelligent being out of this family tree. I mean, our family members like gorillas, chimpanzees, apes of any kind, they still exist, but they are not intelligent. Only we are intelligent. So we came from the family tree. How happened that we are intelligent? Someday, extraterrestrials arrived, long time ago. They realized that on this planet we had many forms of lives, including our forefather, an ape type or chimpanzee type. They simply took one cell out of it, changed the DNA and put it back into the womb of a female of the same species. The female gave birth to a child. Of course, if you want to have a new population, you need at least two, female and male. And now they create male and a female. Now we landed the story of the paradise. And God, the so-called God, created Adam and Eve, a new population. So it was an artificial mutation made by the extraterrestrials. That's why we are intelligent. And the rest of our family tree is still alive, but they are not intelligent. And this does not contradict evolution. Yes, we are part of evolution, but someone changed our evolution. By the way, this is easily understandable. Compare it to an apple tree. You have an apple, and now our scientists want to find out how old is this apple tree? What are the cores, the sources? How many millions of years old is an apple tree? And they find out for thousands of years, and they find the original apple. Okay, but during the evolution of the apple, we humans can, and simply by grafting, we changed the apple. The same thing happened with us. So you do not contradict the evolution of the apple tree. Yes, he has an evolution, but by grafting, we changed something. And the extraterrestrial changed something in our evolution simply by a genetical design. It's as easy as that.
And concerning the question of the publication date, the evolution book will come out next year, and this year will come out another book, Confession of an Egyptologist. This will be on the market in fall.
I don't know if I understood this. I have written a book called Confession of an Egyptologist. I had for 20 years a wonderful friend. His name was Adel Hamad, and he was an Egyptologist. And we were really good friends, and I learned a lot from him. He was killed. He was shot down by terrorists. And so to say, in his honor, I have published some of our discussion, the stories of an Egyptologist. This will be up in the United States, I guess.
Yes, in fall.
In fall. And my newest book, at least in the German market, is called Evolution is Wrong. This will be, I guess, in the United States in next year. So anyhow, it's a never-ending story. Evolution is Wrong is book number 44. And I'm still alive. I feel well. The gods love me.